Well, thank you very much. It is a huge privilege to be introduced by the German Minister of Health, who gave a visionary outlook on the next decade in healthcare in Europe. Our session is called Digital Technologies, Hospitals and Society, which is quite an odd triad, because if you read it, it not necessarily fits together. On the other hand, it draws a crowd and an attention, and I'm very grateful for that. We'd like to solve this riddle within the next 25 minutes, actually together with Stefan, Raj, and Florian. I'd like to ask Stefan to start with a little impulse. What are we going to talk about during this session?
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We just heard about how demographic change will require technological assistance to really cope with the challenges that are ahead of ourselves, with the keeping up with the level of care that people expect and the growing expectations for that. Germany has been criticized for the slow progress in digital transformation. However, I think the outlook for patients moving forward is actually quite bright. And I think we're now just about to close a gap to many other countries in a number of different aspects. And I think I'm really, as a medical device manufacturer, excited about the initiatives that were championed by Jens Spahn in this area. He probably achieved more in his time as a healthcare minister than probably the last 5 ministers combined. So the focus has been really, preventions and chronic diseases, etc., that we've heard. And I would like to shift the focus on what I'm going to talk about to hospitals and data at hospitals. So I think this is really something that represents a tremendous opportunity for Germany and Europe in particular. So in Germany, the standard of care is probably the highest in the world. And I can really speak from my insights by Brainlab technology that's used in 5,000 hospitals in 100 countries. And when I had to recommend or look for a hospital to go through a serious intervention, I would definitely pick Germany. So now, as we are able to leverage that and digitize those processes and aggregate data and process that data, that could truly translate into a major competitive advantage over many other countries. So healthcare is probably one of the few areas in platform economy that's not already taken over by an American or Chinese platform. So really something that represents a tremendous opportunity for Europe. So, and I want to focus on surgery. Surgery, by definition, in a hospital in the operating room is the #1 value driver, but it's also the biggest efficiency leak. And as every step and every task there is quite analog. So in order to increase the access of better care and consistency of care, and also to disseminate knowledge and best practice in a more effective way, we must digitize surgery. And this is something that Brainlab has been doing for 3 decades in a relatively small area, being neurosurgery. We have, at its core, developed some sort of GPS system for the human body that we have used to place surgery of brain tumors more precise, to position spinal implants, or to irradiate a lung tumor more effectively and less expensive. So we're now taking this experience and this foundation that we've created and deploying it as a platform that is accessible to all our partners, but also all our competitors. And this is something which is bringing almost a technology that we know from many other platforms, like mapping technology, like Google, etc., to a broad area of use cases in healthcare. Because if we look and aggregate and process data, even subtle changes in anatomy needs to be measured and calibrated. For example, when we talk about treatment of Parkinson, this is a procedure that today takes 8 hours. Patients need to be awake for surgery. Surgeons try to find the right spot, which is something where they ask the patient questions during surgery until they finally hit the right position. And this is, of course, something that scares many patients away. So by having processed and aggregated data, most of it outside Germany, we have been able to really find the sweet spot of where we need to place a catheter in the first place, to the point of where we can take that surgery and do it while the patient is asleep. Completely changing not only the outcomes, but also the prospects. And now we're at the threshold of where we need to generate even more data from those procedures. So many of the treatments that we see today, whether it is cancer treatment, etc., are overly simplistic. The experience is based on clinical studies that have been conducted over time. They take the approach one size fits all with very little customization for the individual patient. And only with sufficient data can we really make a big change. Patients with brain metastasis, for example, are either treated with 22, 18, or 15 gray, because this is like what has been tested which has been published. Why not 17.9 or 21.3 gray? And we have created already, data pools that have almost invalidated 50 years of research and 3,000 publications on that topic. So these are all examples that show how important, how crucial access is to healthcare. And I appreciate the efforts to improve the access of healthcare for scientists, but also industry needs to be at the position where we can access and work with data. So I certainly understand the technicalities and the practicalities, as you talked about the life of a healthcare minister, to basically make that happen. So I think it's like something that gradually in steps need to be resolved over time. But I think it's also a challenge in the position of German society and how they're able to accept the use of data in a broader sense. So I think that the skepticism that we see is deeply rooted in probably the European value system. And so this may at first look like a big backdraw and challenge for driving technical innovation in Germany. But if we successfully establish that European framework of governance and code of conduct, then it can in fact turn into a tremendous opportunity. And that's what I want to be really talking about, and I'm quite excited. So I think there's a number of open topics. For example, if you de-identify data, who is telling me that there's not going to be some technology one day that will be able to re-identify the data and link it back to the original person? So therefore, probably it is important that this profiling of patients is really barred by law. So anybody can break into my apartment if they try hard enough. So the solution is not going to be turning every apartment into Fort Knox, but also at the same time looking at basically the right prosecution of burglars, etc. So I think that when we look at the opportunities, we need to really balance the risks with basically the ethics of not using the data. So I think it's a really fundamental ethical problem. The Data Ethics Committee of the German government has, a couple of months ago, proposed a number of different recommendations, many of which for the industry can be turned into a code of conduct, and that's certainly a critical step. So the opportunity of what digital data and processing the data can do significantly outweighs not using the data. And I think there is really, not using data is killing patients at scale. And more than probably any terrorist attack, etc. So therefore, I think as a company that for 30 years has been involved in digital health, I can only ask for a public debate across all levels of society to really somehow find a way of imposing rules on ourselves that enable us to more effectively use data in a unique and new European way. And Jens Spahn asked for European pioneers, and I think there's a lot of pioneers here in this room. They're European. Let's together change healthcare for the benefit of patients. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Stefan. As a trained head and neck surgeon, being digitalized seems a little bit frightening to me, but probably also to my colleagues. I'm happy that Raj is with us as an active physician, because from a Central European or continental European perspective, the UK, driven by a single-payer tax-paid system, the NHS, seems to have some advantages, basically. We have the impression that you have been thinking about digital strategy very early on, and that by this centralistic system, you can implement it much smoother than we probably in our federal republic or in the other federal systems. Tell us a little bit about your experiences at Addenbrooke's, which is an NH, one of the leading, maybe the leading high-tech hospital in the UK.
Sure, thank you. I think there are efforts that have been conducted in NHS as a single healthcare confederation over some time. We didn't get it right to start with. So the National Programme for IT in 2003 was £10 billion of investment, and it didn't really produce so well. But now, in more recent times with NHSX, we've seen more successes. And I think that's really building on an increased understanding of what it takes to succeed. The first is that it brings together the right groups of people. It brings together the health service, the Department of Health, social care, together with key innovators, both in hospital and in industry, and an understanding that they need to be able to share that data together. And also it has driven standardization so that we have standard data interchange formats, connections between different sets of hospital data. And I think those are the things that are allowing us to see some new innovations coming. We have a single NHS application that we can deploy digital apps across the whole of the NHS, an app marketplace that's now starting to come to bear, and an accelerated mechanism to get digital technologies that seem to be very useful out there into the NHS very quickly. So these are all things that have worked very, very well. But however, in spite of that, we're still faced with the same regulatory problems. And for me, fundamentally, the issue is that hospitals generate huge amounts of interesting high-value data. It was interesting to hear Jens say that we can perhaps make real inroads into cancer care with data, and I certainly believe that. Any large hospital will generate data sets that have some interesting answers within them. But the difficulty is that we are interpreting the regulation, although we all work under the same European law, the way in which that is actually implemented varies again from provider to provider, and that is still generating some roadblocks. And there's still a lot of distrust. I think people want to know that you are compliant with law. They want to know that you do what you say. But really, to promote trust in the use of healthcare data and sharing it between the NHS, research and industry, they actually want you to say what you do. They want to know how the data is going to be used with much more granular detail. And I think that's the key to moving forwards.
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, obviously there's a question of, or there's a tension, or probably even a trade-off between compliance and transparency. There's a lot of mistrust, as you said, probably even sometimes paranoia. Florian, your company works with patient data. Patients are giving away their data, that's my understanding. So what obstacles did you face, basically? I mean, who is willing to give his data? Is it everybody, or is it just the digital elite, and we have the digital precariat that is not interested in that?
Yeah, well, to be honest, our company doesn't collect so much patient data, but I'm very happy to answer the questions because I think that the willingness of patients to share data actually correlates with the understanding, the belief that sharing data will actually help themselves. So people with severe health issues are much more willing to share their data because they actually have the interest that this shared data will actually improve their situation. So that's one point, but I think both other gentlemen actually highlighted that it's not only the patient that shares data, but it's also the software, the hardware, the hospital that can share data, which is probably even more relevant for the patient, because I think that the systems that Stefan developed generate so much health-related, outcome-related data. That's very important for patients. So I think our job is more to actually educate patients about the impact that software, hardware, and technology can have on their health-related outcomes. And that's where we see our job, actually educate them and help them getting access to the right care. Because what I take from Stefan's words is that it actually makes a difference whether I'm in hospital A and B, or if I get the surgery with Brainlab support or not. And we try to educate patients about that and give them access to the right care.
Okay. As Raj said, this is obviously high value data that is generated, and it's completely different in the quality that you probably have as a kind of normal a product provider or a platform like Amazon, for instance. I mean, this is behavioral data, basically, but here we are very much into the data set of the individual body, of the individual person, so to say. Stefan, is it, I mean, looking at your systems and getting to know them, trying to understand them, are we losing, or what can you do basically to not lose the basis? I mean, a sociologist wrote the sentence that the digitalization is de-averaging society. So the smart people get smarter, the dumb people get dumber. So the question is, are we creating a digital elite? Are we creating something that is extremely sophisticated and advanced, while on the other hand, basic medicine stays basically the same? How are you avoiding it?
I personally think that in hospital-based care, which is something that I talked about, we have almost like the opposite being the case. I think it's one of the privileges of Germany that really we have broad access to like really quality, quick care, regardless of people's skills, abilities, background, etc. So it's a very non-discriminating healthcare system, and I think that of course. Making sure that the way of how data is being used, there's also a very important protection of any potential discrimination. But I think that when you look at the use of apps and other technological tools, then you might potentially have the risk of maybe losing some people behind that have a hard time maybe coping with those new tools. But I think when it comes to hospital-based care, I think the processing of the data that is accumulated in the hospital can be the same regardless of where the patient may be from. I'm, however, worried about the fact that the data in hospitals today is a lot of times aggregated in silos. So despite the fact that hospitals in general have a lot of digital information, a lot of the current large companies, whether it is Johnson & Johnson, Medtronic, Stryker, etc., when they create systems, they're all closed systems that are only supporting their own implants, where conceptually you have a $5 implant that you're selling at $1,000 and build an entire ecosystem of a closed data silo around that. And so therefore, I think that those companies have all a business model that is going to be a risk as there's a broader platform for digital health. And I think the future players and stakeholders, as also Jens Spahn pointed out, are more likely to be Amazon, Google, Alibaba, etc. And so that is probably an area where the understanding and the sophistication of also meaning, that the meaning or the understanding of the implication if I donate my data, that's probably something which is almost like a background of readiness and education for use of data. So I think that we need to invest more in education, that people understand conduct with data, the implications, and there's probably therefore also the need of a code of conduct to protect those patients that would be less sophisticated to decide on their own whether it is okay to donate their data from basically just any implications that would turn against them.
Okay. Understood. But is it just education or is it more cultural work? I mean, hospitals are so traditional, very, very conservative organizations, pretty hierarchical still, specifically in surgery or in the surgical disciplines. What happened? How are you going to do that? Or how did you do that in Addenbrooke's? I mean, where is there a digital mindset actually? Or is it just technology driven and people have to accept it because it's there?
I think it's something that has grown organically. People have increased their acceptance of digital technologies and their reliance on it in other parts of their lives. And so then when they come into work, these very traditional hierarchical systems, they look at them and they say, well, is this the way that we need to do things? Why can't I have the same functionality that I carry on my phone when I come into work? And I think that helps. It helps increasing heterogeneity. It helps increasing accessibility for staff as well as for patients too.
Okay. I have a question for the three of you. We have been introduced with a new decade and with a perspective on the new decade. So, and we're supposedly behind However, the race is not over yet. Healthcare is changing very, very slowly. The technology is well advanced. What do you think is where is the deficit and which gap needs to be closed? Is it a technology gap? Is it a legal or politics gap? Or is it the culture and mindset or something else? What do you think?
It's difficult to answer. As I said before, I think I'm not so pessimistic that we are so much behind. I think it has a lot to do with education. Educating the patients, but also the doctors about the benefits of digitalization. I think that's probably the key, because if we're looking into the future and we can imagine of collecting lots of data that will actually enable us to increase dramatically the efficiency of medicine and being able to actually develop personalized medicine is probably a goal that everybody would easily subscribe to. So I don't think we're so much behind. Probably not from a technological perspective, maybe from a cultural perspective, because data security is a higher issue in Germany than it is in other countries. But as I said, I'm very optimistic, because I think that once you get into the conversation with the people and they see the benefits, it's probably easier to turn it around. And I think for the patient side, that's probably getting them involved and educating them and empowering them of really being part in their therapy, in the decision-making process, and educating them about what's going on with their health. And I think on the hospital side, it probably has a lot to do with pay for performance, value-based care. Because if it makes a difference for the hospital and they have to report patient outcome measures, they will certainly have a higher interest in actually collecting that data. So I'm not so pessimistic. I think it has a lot to do with changing the mindset by education.
Okay, absolutely. Raj, what do you think?
I'd agree. Change in mindset, it's a cultural thing. In the UK, only 30% of people under the age of 40 have been admitted to hospital. So they would have no experience directly of the nature of the data that's being generated and the value of their own data in that data set and how it can help others. And so I think it's dialogues of this type that are really needed to help unlock the data that we already have. I think we have the data.
I have an important question to you. So, Stefan, 30 seconds. What do you think? Is it technology, legal, politics, or is it culture and mindset?
I think it's definitely culture and mindset. I think it's important that society looks at the opportunity of sophisticated technology, and I think this will make all the difference. And then, of course, I think that politics need to provide that be a governance or a code of conduct framework. But I think that's probably going to happen, and I think we just need to accelerate adoption of society to understanding the opportunities that are ahead.
Okay, great. We heard about the GAFAs in healthcare, the Googles, Amazons, Facebooks, and Apples. What are you guys doing with Amazon? Let us know.
So you're referring to the recent announcement about the provision of NHS-based information on Alexa. I think it's difficult. There's been a lot of spin applied to this. This is effectively the NHS licensing for free the use of information resources, not patient-level resources, into voice recognition products, particularly Alexa. I think it's an interesting and controversial partnership, but I think at least it represents a step moving in the right direction of trying to engage, make an initial step with a low-risk data set, high value, low risk, and try and build out technologies to actually help disadvantaged people in the home.
Okay, well, that's interesting. Stefan, what do you think? Shall we be afraid of the big data hubs entering to healthcare, or how can we protect, so to say, ourselves from this?
Well, I think this is going to happen, anyways. And however, I think we need to be really setting for ourselves the rules of how we want to govern data and sharing data. I think it's important that we do share data, but it's also important that we provide a, as I said, code of conduct and framework that defines that. And I think this is probably the best way to leverage the opportunities that those platform companies also provide. I think that those companies have really achieved, tremendous, technical tools that I think we really must use for providing better care, but we also need to be cautious of how we share data with them. And there's probably the requirement to have Chinese walls between people that process patient data, even if de-identified, and people that process positional data like GPS data, speech, and search engine traffic that is typically not de-identified. And I think this is probably something that needs to be, separated. And then I think that there's probably a very healthy coexistence, and as I said, great opportunities for patients with life-threatening diseases.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you, gentlemen. We are precisely within the time frame. This was thought to be a teaser, and hopefully you feel teased to the DLD Live, I guess. That's the title conference happening later this year. It's an extremely complex but also very, very exciting topic, the digitalization of healthcare, because we see that boundaries obliterate. We see that there will be no longer a difference between a drug, a medical device, and the actual digital solution. Think of autonomous insulin pumps, for instance, that work like the actual pancreatic gland. So there are a lot of things that we can explore. A lot of future is happening, and we have to talk about it also in the context of society. And you, everybody of us, is a patient, was a patient, or will be a patient. We can't escape that. Thank you so much, gentlemen, and thank you for your attention.